happens at a general election only when we want to change something. We think that just sounds a little bit patronising. It sounds like they do want to keep spoon-feeding us. It sounds like they're the ones who've got a driving licence and they're going to drive us around wherever we want to go, but they're never going to give us the right to make the journey on our own. Go.
There's a difference between an argument that sounds good and an argument that is actually sound. What we said was that how people lack the perspective and the technical law.
Okay, they lack the perspective and the technical law. Fantastic. That's why you probably don't just get a group of 10 people writing the law as it is passed. This brings me nicely onto the contentions of second opposition. Let's say there are huge lacunas in the opposition case. We say, guess what? Students, given 20 minutes prep time, probably can't think of every single detail in a policy because they're not policy wonks. If they were, they should probably leave student debate and go and run the United Nations because they do a much better job. So we really don't think that pointing out that we failed to include every tiny little detail of exactly how this legislation should be passed is the strongest opposition you could have mounted on. Somewhat disappointing. But most importantly, nobody has attacked the principle that has run right through the opposition bench, that we have the right to control the legislation that effectively then controls us. We gave a lot of argument in the opening half of the bench about exactly why we sometimes need this initiative to correct the mistakes that government and parliament inevitably sometimes make. No, thank you. We've told you further in the closing half of our bench, and this is the most fundamental argument we counter it, simply that you cannot always have the confidence and the faith and the reliance that government, no thank you and stop badgering, that government is always good or always acting in your interest. Government is influenced unduly, government has its own interest. They told us, incredibly naively, that there is no gulf between the political elite and the average working person. We tell you that that is just a fallacy, that that is living in La La Land. We ask you, how much opportunity does the average working class man born in Lahore have of ascending to the national parliament without patronage, without sponsorship, and without the kind of undue influence that we are trying to rectify? No, thank you. We very clearly told you that we live in a situation whereby governments protect first their own interest, then the interests of the class around them. Entire groups of people are therefore marginalised in that process, are given no voice at all. If we stand for anything on this side of the House, we stand for giving a voice to the smallest, the weakest, the most disenfranchised. We find it immoral that they would stand up and oppose that principle.
Yes, sir.
No.
Okay, sir.
Oh, it's alright, I don't need protecting and he needs the chance.
That very certain person who can't even dream of becoming the president does matter by his vote, and that is why he can decide who...
Okay, that's why it's fine. False, false, false. It is incredibly naive to believe that every vote counts individually. It simply does not. There are special interest groups for whom policy is created simply because they carry the cash, because they carry the economic power to hold that parliament and that government to account. Do we, the ordinary people on the street, matter half as much to them? Of course we don't, because our one chance to hold them to account in 4 years' time is subsumed by other interest groups who are pandered to at that time as well. We see governments routinely break election promises, so we can't even have the faith that the opposition bench has that once we've elected them, they will do their job. David Cameron, my Prime Minister, 6 months ago said, I will cut the deficit and not the NHS. Yesterday, he tore apart the NHS. We need citizen power to correct the mistakes of government, to hinder the evils of government. V for Vendetta told you, ladies and gentlemen, the people should not be afraid of its government. Government! Be afraid of its people!
I heard the last speaker of this debate, Mr. Vikas Mew.
Am I audible? Yes. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The closing government wins the debate, but the debate that they win is the declamation round, which is going to be held next week. In a world where we live by reason and logic, which right now seems quite far away, but which through Dawn and my speeches we will journey towards, is a world in which there is only one side of the house that will win this debate, and that is the side that caters to these minor details that I'm going to draw your attention towards. Now, what are these minor details that I'm talking about, which Dawn has already raised? Now, there are two fundamental assumptions made by team government in today's debate, both governments in fact. Assumption number one, that the system that we live in today carries no checks and balances and there is no hope. And number two, that citizens, that people like you and me are somehow bound to behave differently from our politicians. That the people that we elect to our houses of legislature are somehow different beings and will respond differently to pressure. Now the first point, now the weak people who we have been deemed as immoral beings, you know, because we do not stand up for the weak. These minor details. Now the first fundamental question is, what is the size of the number of people who will stand up as per both these sides of the house? Forget about the fact that they're not at the United Nations. They are debaters and they're supposed to answer these questions. The first question is, what is the size of this segment of the population that needs to stand up and propose a law that will then be put to vote? Now, listen to me, do not laugh. Listen to me. Because it is this so-called weak segment of the society, of Pakistani society, that will today stand up in favor of Mumtaz Qadri and say that pass a law that lets him off the hook. Say that pass a law that condones the killing of Salman Taseer. It is that weak segment of the society, because according to them, it can be 500 people, it can be 1,000 people. It can, according to their same definition, be this political elite, because it can be these large corporations which can then get up and influence people. So there are no checks and balances in their system as well. So what is the size of the people? And secondly, who frames the question? That is another question. Who frames the question? Remember the question that Ziaul Haq posed to you and me? Exactly. That whether we want to live in an Islamic state or not? Who poses this question? If the question is framed the same way, if there is no separate, I'll answer point of information. If there is no separatability, then we're living under dictatorial rule brought about by any class for the next 10 years. They say Daniel and your name? Aisha made two fundamental wrong assumptions, and both of them can be summed up in one sentence. That there have been police states in this world because you have not had citizen-initiated referenda. Hitler passed the worst of his laws by putting them to referendum. And what makes you think that had Hitler, you know, inculcated those people with propaganda, thousands of those people would not have gotten up and passed a law that says that Jews cannot marry a German, or a German cannot marry a Jew, or do away with the Jews of this country? What makes you think that people like you and me cannot be prejudiced in the same way that our politicians can? That is the fundamental assumption that they have made. Then, moving on to the next point, ladies and gentlemen. They say that let people decide, let people come forward, let corporations be controlled when it comes to their loyalty. We ask you this fundamental question. Who smokes cigarettes? Who intakes alcohol? It is people like you and me. Now, when something is going to be put to vote, when, for example, 500 people say that smoking should be banned and corporations should be fined by the millions, do you think Philip Morris will sit back and say, okay, since now that has gone to the citizen referenda, we're not going to do anything. They're going to pump in millions of dollars and influence you the same way that they influence politics. Now, the answer to that is not to initiate citizen referenda, but to enact a law through your parliament that says that this is the amount of money that corporations can spend when a law is being debated. Do you have laws similar to this in force? Do you have controls on lobbying? Yes, there are controls on lobbying. Are these perfect? No. Are they ever going to be perfect? No. But what is the best way? Vote out the government that you think is not doing enough. Now, consider the next question. Well, have the Monsanto seed people come in and everything will be fixed up because the poor farmers of India will not listen to. Allow them to go to courts, as we've already said. Secondly, I'll give you another example of what the people of India can do. 3 years ago, the Election Commission of India suspended candidates from the Bharatiya Janata Party saying that they were using the rhetoric of religion in states like Gujarat to contest elections. Now, what if that law had been put to vote in a citizen referenda? A Bharatiya Janata majority state full with Hindu fanatics. Would those people have allowed any protection to the Muslim citizens in those states? Now, and this is where our case comes forward when it comes to the protection of minorities. This side of the house is the only side that is standing up for the protection of minorities. Why are minorities protected better in a legislature? Because in a legislature you have 300 or 350 people, fine. You have at least 30 or 40 from the minorities. When a debate takes place, the minorities are given a platform. They are given coverage, they are given media coverage, they are given a proper political platform on which the debate takes place. They are guaranteed a certain voice. 40 people in a house, national coverage, when 40 out of 300 talk and disagree with something, people will listen to them. When 10 million scream for one thing and 500,000 oppose it, nobody will listen to them. And that is how the United States Constitution was framed, because this is what James Madison, when debating the question of whether the US Constitution should allow referendums, said no, because he said it is the tyranny of the majority that the United States has set up to govern them. And they talk about the state of California, which allows citizen referenda. I'll tell you what California has been going through. Which state now in the United States has the worst fiscal deficit in the United States? The answer is California. Why? Because every time the state wants to impose a tax, the citizens of California say, no, we don't want to pay taxes, we are not going to pay taxes, and the government ends up governing, and people like the army have to end up resigning. Therefore, just hear me out for 45 more seconds. The fundamental questions that they have faced is that there is a disjoint in the system. We are saying there are problems, but do you have mechanisms to fix it? Don said you have the judiciary, try and fix it. Secondly, you have the tyranny of the majority. If you allow that to take over, things will go even worse than they are right now. Then they talked about corporations. If you're talking about corporations, every time there is debate, corporations will fund that debate, they will influence you and me like they do influence our politicians. That is not limited to them. And lastly, lastly, the question remains that would we have lived in a more perfect world in which citizen referenda had been allowed? The answer is simply no, because Hitler tried that, he got what he wanted. Mussolini tried that, he got what he wanted. People are susceptible. The only way to make a difference is to have those laws and keep voting governments out. That is the power that you and I have. Fear the wrath of Mumtaz Qadri and the people who support him, because you and I have the power to vote this government out if it stands for that.